Find a pen and fill the paper with the message that it wants to send.
Continuing my discussion with Erin Seidemann for the Aviatrix Writers Room, and we're going to talk a little bit more about writing and her memoir, Postcards from the Sky. So Erin, you talk about in your book, and you talked a little bit about in our book discussion about how you have an English degree, but what did you do to prepare for writing a memoir specifically?
Well, so, I have always been writing my whole life. But a memoir, I'm of the camp that a memoir should be 100% truthful. You heard years ago, I forget the name of the book, some guy kind of got called out because he wrote a memoir and people found out that not everything was true. I think it was a Holocaust memoir, found out that not everything was true.
Yeah.
So, everything is true. Some of it had to be a little toned down, but it really was just, kind of not just compiling the stories, but especially for a book, rather than like if you have an online blog or if you're writing magazine articles here and there, a book needs to have a logical flow. It can't just be like, oh, I like this story and I like this story and we're going to put them in this order. So even after I sat down to write the book, which I naive first-time book author, I thought writing the book was the difficult part. So when I finished that, I'm like, okay, I'm done. That's the hard part. Now comes the easy part. Oh, no. Wow. I have seldom been that wrong about something in my life. I mean, I've been wrong plenty of times. I'll be the first to admit that. But wow, I could not have been further from the truth. Getting a book published that's a whole nother Zoom call. But
I want to talk about a little bit of it. Okay. That's what we're doing here for sure.
I mean, once I wrote it, and this is even drawing on my educational background in English and specifically English writing. 'Cause you always have that. It's like the rivalry between English majors and math majors, which I always found strange because I was an English major and a math minor. But there's the same rivalry between English literature majors and English writing majors. And we both think the other is crazy, which they are. Okay, I'm here to tell you. But the reason I got an English degree is the original plan was to go to law school. I've kind of always been fascinated with that kind of work. And then I dated a lawyer, and then I'm like, I don't want to do that. And, now that was sort of towards the end of my sophomore year in college. And I'm like, well, I don't want to switch because that's just going to take longer. And, a bachelor's degree doesn't get you as much as I think it used to. So I didn't want to switch and prolong it because I'm one of those people who I always made really good grades, dean's list, all that kind of stuff, but I hated school. So I didn't want to prolong it. And yet I still didn't know what I wanted to do. I still don't know what I want to do. Actually, I'm 41. Hi, I'm Erin, and I don't know what I want to do. But so even with the English writing background and education, I had no idea what it was going to be like to find a publisher for the book. And that took about 3 times as long as writing the book. And it was miserable. And it was literally like having another full-time job, because you can't just write a book proposal and send it to 500 places, because each place that you send it to wants it in a different format, or they want different things about it or different parts of it. And it literally, and they say, like, if you don't abide by these guidelines of submitting a proposal, we throw it out. We don't even look at it, we throw it out. So you have to make sure, it's kind of like flying. You have to follow this checklist that they've laid out for you, and it has to be perfect. And so that was literally it was more than a full-time job, because I was spending more than 8 hours a day on finding either an agent or a publisher. You can kind of go either way. I ended up just going straight to the publisher. But had I known that before I started writing, I probably wouldn't have done it.
No. Really?
So yeah, so I'm glad that I was completely naive, fat, dumb, and stupid, because I was, and I really would not have had the desire or the drive to do it had I known that from the beginning. So so it's a
Well,
good thing.
I'm going to ask you some questions related to that. First of all, you mentioned a book proposal. So submitting a manuscript in fiction writing is very different than submitting nonfiction or memoir. Can you talk a little bit about so you said you wrote the whole book, but then what typically goes into a proposal?
So it is different for every publisher and every agent, but there's some similar parts. They're going to want to hear something about you as the author. Have you written before? No. And that's a big strike against you. Once you have published a book, it's a lot easier to get like a second book accepted. But when you're the first time author, and especially if you don't have any kind of social media following, my book was published about 5 years ago. So let's say maybe about 7 to 8 years ago was when I started shopping around for an agent or a publisher. The social media wasn't, it was big, but it wasn't as big as it is today. But they still, any publisher, any agent still wanted you to have, they call it a platform. And I didn't have that. So I had a bunch of strikes against me. First time author, no platform. So you start trying to develop this platform. Well, how do you, it's kind of like when you're first going into the job industry and they want you to have experience, but how do you get experience without going into the job industry?
Right.
It is the same thing with trying to get a book published. They want you to have this platform, but how do you get a platform without the book? And it was so, I can't tell you how frustrating the process was and how time consuming the process was. But I mean, obviously it all worked out in the end. It looks great when you can say, hey, here's my book, but the amount of work and time that went into this thing that's made up of paper and has words on it, it's staggering.
What resources do you think would have been helpful to you at that point, when you were ready to start looking? Or what lessons did you learn from that you would go back and redo if you were to do it all over again, or if you decide to publish your second book?
I obviously from the English degree had a lot of friends who had written books, especially in academia, which is a bit different, but plenty who knew the industry. And unless your best friend is either an agent or a publisher, it's not going to do you any good. So, I was asking for advice and people were happily giving advice, but you still, unfortunately, have to do that work yourself. Nobody's going to be able to do it for you. Like I said, unless your best friend is a publisher, in which case you won't even be listening to this because you won't need it. But yeah, I mean, all of that work, you have to do it yourself. Nobody's going to do it for you. It's not pleasant, but there is this to show for it.
So you got your book deal, went straight to the publisher, and did you have to go do major revisions after you submitted it?
This is a touchy subject because I
read the back of the book, so I know it. I caught the gist. So tell me.
I mean, of all the things you've asked me about, this is probably the most touchy subject, which you wouldn't. But I'm an editor, so when somebody wants to edit my writing, it's not just personal. It's like my heart. That is my heart. Okay. And I'm one of those, we call them grammar Nazis. I don't like that term because I'm Jewish, but yeah, let's just say a grammar stickler. I'm one of those people who will correct you when you're speaking or will correct your writing. I try to do it nicely. I think a lot of people probably don't take it that way.
My kids sure don't take it that way.
Yeah. So to have somebody edit my writing, every time I got revisions from the editor, I had to just kind of like, okay, all right, just listen to hear out what they have to say. I'm a professional editor. They are a professional editor. and you know, I also knew, okay, my financial research editing is going to be just a little different than editing a memoir or any type of book. So I knew that, but there were whole chapters that went away.
Oh.
And I'm like, but no, I like that, and it makes a good point. And they totally agreed. They said, look, I get it. It's a great story and it makes a really good point, but it doesn't fit with the flow of the book. So I think that was the biggest adjustment that I had to make, that, okay, even though I have these great stories, and I've told them to my friends, and they say these are great stories and this should go in your book, when they knew that I was writing a book, that sometimes that stuff has to be sacrificed if it doesn't fit the theme or the flow, or, you know, so you may have great stories, but if they don't have some kind of logical flow in a book, they might.
You know, this is such an interesting perspective and thing to talk about. So let me ask you a question. When you were in your writing program, did you do a lot of critique groups with your writing?
We did, yeah. I mean, that really is part of the education. So 4 years of that, I was pretty used to that. Never fun, but you know, it really did help a lot. I mean, I'm not going to say that that I didn't listen. I'd say like 99% of the time I incorporated what people had to say. So you have to be flexible. You have to accept that, okay, my writing isn't perfect 100%, when I put pen to paper. And I think as long as you can accept that, and even me as a professional editor, then it'll definitely help it. Because now that I'm back now, and I'd say it took maybe a year or so after the book was published that I could step back enough and say, they were right. It was two chapters, and I really loved them. They were great. But I will admit now that they were right. They did not fit the book.
First of all, have you had the opportunity to put those somewhere else for people to see, for your readers to see, that we could read them?
I thought about that, and they even said, like, you can submit these to magazines, as a shorter article. One was actually about a physical sexual harassment that I experienced on a commercial flight. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot more of that published in magazines since then, but back then it was still not really something that publishers were looking to talk about. It was too unpleasant. I literally had a guy feel me up when he thought I was sleeping on a commercial flight.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and I made a big scene. It was a red eye, so the lights were off, everybody was asleep, and he thought I was asleep. And I'm sitting there, like, I thought, okay, I must be going nuts. Who would do this? I was sitting back. I had my arms crossed. And I had on a really thick fleece thing. It was cold. I was coming from San Francisco to New Orleans, and I kept feeling something strange, like on the side of my boob. Can I say that, boob? And I thought, okay, the guy's just kind of okay. I thought the guy's just like, because every time I looked over, the guy next to me was asleep too. And I thought, okay, he's just kind of, shifting when he sleeps. He's one of those, jittery people when he sleeps or whatever. And it kept happening. And I'm like, this is just so strange, because every time I open my eyes, he's asleep. Am I dreaming this? So I thought, okay, I'm gonna put my tray table down and like put my head down. Because, sometimes I would sleep that way. You sleep any way you can on those red eye flights. And I'll see if he's doing it. And so I put my head down and I acted like I was asleep, but I had my arms around me, and so he couldn't see that my eyes were open. And I saw his hand come across and grab my boob.
Oh my God.
So then I'm like, my heart was beating so hard that I'm like, how can he not feel my heartbeat through my boob? And then I was faced with, whoa, what do I do? And so, like, it was maybe like 30 seconds for me to think of what to do. And first of all, I jabbed the crap out of him.
Elbow would have been going.
Yeah, I did. And I screamed. I don't even remember what I screamed, but I screamed as loud as I could. I woke up every single person on that plane. And so a flight attendant came over, and asked what was going on. And by this time, like I had even like I punched the guy. I punched him too. I was like, because he kept looking at me like, shh. I'm like, are you kidding me? So, I mean, I was like decking him. Okay. And he was kind of a big guy. And the flight attendant comes over, and then, by now, like people in the row in front of me are, looking over the back of their seat. And I told her what happened. And she's like, well, ma'am, it's a full flight, so I can't move you. I'm like, no, you are going to move me.
Oh,
you are going to move
no.
me right now. And she's like, and apparently since then they've gone through additional training to deal with this kind of stuff. But she literally had no idea what to do with me then. And so luckily, like this guy, a few rows up, he stood up and he said, ma'am, come and sit with my oldest son. He will make sure that you're fine. He's not going to do anything to you. Come and sit with him. I'm going to switch seats with you. And like the flight attendant was like, no, sir, you can't do that. And he's like, well, I'm going to do it. So thank God, for people like that. And so he switched seats with me. And as I was getting up from my seat, because I had to climb over this pervert to get out of my seat, because I was in the window seat. I always get a window seat. So I had to climb over this guy, and I made sure that my knee made contact with,
Erin,
I mean,
okay, yeah, you have to publish this somewhere. You have to publish this. What a crazy story.
Well, yeah, and even when I got off the flight, they still didn't know what to do with me. I got off the flight. I went to the ticket agent at the counter as soon as I got there and told him what had happened. And she said, did one of the pilots come out to talk to you? I said, no. And she's like, oh, they were supposed to send one of the pilots out. And I'm like, I'm a pilot. Okay. I mean, I don't know. I don't fly commercial.
Well, it's not the pilot's fault that this happened.
Yeah. I'm like, I don't know what the pilot could have done. I guess it's just having like a figure of authority come out and talk to you. But she said, well, do you want me to call airport security? And I'm like, yes, I want you to call airport security. This guy's going to do it again, So security came by and he talked, and I was sitting there as the guy came off the plane. I'm like, that's him. And the secure airport police held him and put him in handcuffs. And he talked to the guy. He found out he was a merchant marine. And he said, do you want to press charges? And I said, okay, let me ask you something. I didn't really know enough about it, but I said, if I press charges, doesn't he have like my full name and my address and all that kind of stuff because it's on public record? And he said, yeah, he would. And I said, I can't. I live alone. I can't live in fear of this guy, trying to find me after this, after I, if he loses his job or something and he's upset with me because he lost his job. And the airport cop, he was really sympathetic and he's like, look, I totally understand. I have a daughter. I wouldn't want somebody like that knowing where my daughter lived. So I totally get it. He's like, I'm going to make it as miserable for him as I can before he leaves. And I'm going to get the name and number of his employer and I'm going to call his employer, but I will not give him your information. And, so, I mean, there really are good people who do that kind of stuff, but yeah, I mean, the flight attendants had no idea how to deal with it. And I've seen in the past few years on the Facebook group FAST that some other people have had something similar happen. And apparently the flight attendants are a lot better trained now to deal with it.
Well, first of all, okay, now hearing that story after reading the book and thinking about the flow of your story, it's so much tighter without it. Like that is sort of
Exactly.
like a departure way off topic.
Yeah.
However, it is an important topic and I do think that you should publish that. You're right, it is a really good story, meaning like, first of all, it's crazy and bad things are happening and everybody loves to read a story about that. But secondly, like, you try, like when you're walking around on a dark street at night, like you're, at least I am thinking about, okay, I have my situational awareness. I'm thinking about, what are my options here? What defense do I have? Where are my exit strategies? Like if somebody's coming out, I'm like head on a swivel. But I never in a million years thought about what am I going to do if the weirdo next to me puts a hand on me, like seriously. And, just like a pilot, like chair flying or mentalization of, you know, your physical movements. Like, I think that's really important to be able to be prepared to do something like that. I fortunately, from being in bars, I already have like an automatic response. My elbow is coming first. And then all the guys that I'm with are coming after you next. But holy cow. Okay, sorry. I think you should publish it. That's the whole point.
I know, and that was a long answer to your question about you know,
I
what got
know,
cut
and
from the
totally
book,
unrelated to writing, but still, you know, it just demonstrates, you know, the value of having that editor who can see, like, when you're in it, you're in your story, and I'm sort of this way right now about the one that I'm writing. There are things that I'm holding on to, and, you know, I'm sure somebody's going to come in and say, you know, looking at this as a whole, you should consider changing that. And I just have to be open, like, ready. I've done a lot of critique groups. The other thing too is, like, and when we started the book club, and I'm trying to, like, review Erica Armstrong, who wrote a memoir about things that really happened to her. I'm like, how do I critique a book like that? I mean, I could talk about it structurally and how she decided to organize that story, and what she might have done differently. In fact, she wanted to do some things differently, and her editor decided not to do them that way. But you're being critiqued, like, on your life. Like, I'm creating fiction, and I can change it up, but you can't really change up your life. So I think that's probably a different experience in terms of receiving feedback from somebody when you're writing about your personal life.
Yeah, and really the hardest thing, and my mom still smarts from this, the title of my book was not going to be Postcards from the Sky. It was going to be Another Empty Kitchen, because that's the phrase that we hear, unfortunately, and we still hear this from male pilots. And so for those of you who have been fortunate enough to not hear this, or for those of you not in aviation, some male pilots will say, when they see a female pilot, they will say, "Oh, there goes another empty kitchen," meaning we belong in the kitchen and not flying an airplane. And I'm one of those people who, if I don't have something nice to say, I don't say it. And so to me, that is such an ugly, ugly, ugly sentiment that, you know, like you said, you were raised in a household to believe you could do anything, as was I. To hear that he thinks literally half of society doesn't belong doing the same job that he's doing. So that was going to be the name of the book, because I wanted to make that point, that these things, these phrases, these sentiments are still out there. And they wanted to change the title. And, you know, while I was willing to accept cutting those chapters out, and I wasn't really willing to accept it, but I did accept it. The title was sacrosanct to me. And so, but they said, you know, we've gone, you know, they have sort of like a consulting group within the publisher, and where they pitch ideas and, hey, what do you think about this? And apparently everybody thought with the title Another Empty Kitchen that it was some sort of cooking or cookbook or something like that, with kitchen. And I'm like, okay, well, but wait, what if we do Another Empty Kitchen : because a lot of memoirs will have, you know, a title and a subtitle like mine does. And so I said, okay, what if we do Another Empty Kitchen : and then something that makes you know that it's about flying? And they said no to that. And I mean, it literally came down to, like, they had to give me, I couldn't come up with another title, because that was what the book was about. That's the way the book starts. That's the running theme through the book. And they had to, you know, of all the things, I'm always about, you know, not waiting till the last minute to do anything. I come in way ahead of the deadline for everything. And the title was so difficult for me to change that they had to give me a deadline. And it was literally the night before the deadline that I came up with this title. And honestly, I'm still not crazy about it. It's okay, but it's not really what I wanted. But still, I mean, you know, when you want to publish your book and you're not going to self-publish your book, you have to accept that. And that was the hardest pill to swallow of the whole publishing process.
I believe that for sure, especially like if you're that emotionally attached to it and sort of the idea. But again, I'm just going to say that I think for marketing, and also, like, that is a portion of your story. But I think what this title does is that it opens the book up to a much broader market and gives people who might not be specifically interested in aviation or really understand what that little phrase means to us. It brings them into the book maybe more quickly. So I don't know, maybe they know what they're talking about. But I believe it. I know, like I'm emotionally attached to my ideas, and so I get it. Trust me.
Yeah. And I guess now I do realize that it's better to have like sort of a positive title than something negative, even though that really is the running theme of the book. But okay, it's better to have something positive.
Yeah, but I didn't see. Yeah, because while you talked about those issues, I did not connect with this is a book about sexism and being treated poorly in aviation. That's just one aspect of it. I mean, the experience is so much broader than that, and you represent that very well in the book, to include all kinds of other fun things. Thank you for those. That was fun to read. So you got it published. Congratulations. Then what did promotion look like for you? How did you find your platform?
Seriously, like pulling teeth. It was spending pretty much any time that I wasn't working on social media. Even if you take like just a local trip, like to a little local fly-in, take pictures. Something's got to be photogenic. Just thinking of that when I wasn't really thinking of that kind of stuff before. I'd go to a fly-in, I'd eat whatever food they had. If they had a meeting of whatever group I was in, I'd go to that. You're not thinking of like, oh, what can I use from here to post on social media? And, I always think of myself as not being very photogenic. And so I've never been one of those people who's constantly putting stuff on social media. I do now that I'm in pastry school, but it's of my food. It is not of me. And
yes, and we appreciate all those pictures, by the way. They're gorgeous.
Yeah, and I'm happy to do that, but damned if I really want myself that much on social media. And so that was a big adjustment. That and the publisher gave you different options of how you wanted to handle promotion and book tours and all that kind of stuff that seems really glamorous. And I thought it was really glamorous until I was doing it. So, you end up paying for a publicist. They do whatever it is that they do, which is such a completely different world. I can't even really guess what they do, but they would
I just interviewed one earlier this week and posted that interview. So anybody who wants to know what a publicist does and is deciding whether they should hire one or not, and it sounds like if you're someone like Erin, you probably want to.
Yeah.
So give me feedback on that. Was your publicist worth it? And how did that help you?
I suppose they were worth it. They're pretty expensive. And I was not at that time as successful as I am now. So, it was a big deal to spend that kind of money on it. But I mean, they would get me these things that I guess were completely inaccessible to me, like an interview with the local paper and local awards and stuff like that. And then they also arranged the book tour. I think it was a 5-stop book tour, which was really fun. I love book clubs, and it was kind of like just going to a different book club, really. It's kind of a bookstore in different cities, but also very exhausting. And then there were times that, like, if the weather was bad, like you'd only have a couple of people show up, and that's just soul crushing. You're like, but I have this book and I put so much time into it, and where is everybody? And I mean, wow, you really question your life choices when you have an event and only a couple of people show up, if it was raining outside or something. But they definitely did open avenues that I had no idea existed, and especially could not have gotten myself. So I suppose it was worth it. A little difficult to accept that at the time when I'm writing the checks for it.
Yeah, this is one of the things that so the interview is with Jennifer Coburn, who happens to be Robin Carden's book publicist, and she gave us just so much great information. And even if you've already published and your book is already out there, I honestly think it's worth watching. I mean, maybe you know everything about everything already, but I feel like there are just still some things maybe that you can do if you want to continue to sell your books. But one of the things we talked about is, so how do you know if that interview had any effect on sales? And how, like you as a book publicist, do you present, I will increase your sales by blah, blah, blah. And she talks all about that. And so it's interesting. And especially like if you're doing a book launch and you haven't done all of the things that she talks about ahead of time, and for anybody who is within a couple years of publishing, if you listen to that interview, because I'm doing it right now, like that's what I'm doing, is I'm building my platform. And then she talks about getting your book on Goodreads and telling people to put it on their want to read list. And like, then you do the 6 weeks of media stuff leading up to that. So yeah, I'm learning. I thought it was fascinating, but it's good to hear that you used one. And then what are you doing now with it? So you're 5 years later after you published a book. How has it changed your life? And do you get tired of talking about it? I always wonder that.
I definitely don't get tired of talking about it. And especially now, 5 years later, for one that wasn't like, a bestseller or anything, it's not like, it's actually been quite a while since I talked to a book club or anything like that. They dwindle after the first couple of years or so. So, I periodically check Amazon to see if it has any new reviews. And I've read every single review. So it's nice to once in a while you see a new review, or once in a blue moon, I will get a message completely out of the blue on my Facebook page. It's called A Girl in Her Plane, from somebody who read it and said, this inspired me to do this or this or this. And whether it's flying or just traveling, and it's been both, from people that I've heard of, that is so rewarding to me, just to know that, because it's one thing when you write a book and your friends and family say they like it and they say they've read it, but right. It's a totally different thing to hear from somebody you've never met, no mutual friends, and they actually took the time to sit down and write you a note and say how their book influenced you. That's the most rewarding thing to me about writing a book. So please keep those coming if you've read it and you've had anything positive out of it. I love hearing those things, because that makes all the struggle and the time and the money worth it.
That's awesome. Awesome advice. What advice do you have for anyone who's considering publishing a book or writing, or you're going to be like, don't do it. Don't say that. Give us some words of encouragement.
I know I shouldn't say that, but I obviously, if you've listened to this whole thing, you know that it's not going to be easy. So just, you really can't have any expectations. As much as I would love to be a full-time writer, that's just not going to happen. So don't expect to make a lot of money. Don't expect to make any money, actually. And especially now that 5 years have passed, I'll occasionally get like a check for like $50. Kind of don't spend it all in one place. But if you're in it not for the money, it can still be a great way to meet people. I wouldn't have met you without this. There are tons of people who I wouldn't have met. Those are wonderful things. And like I said, hearing from total strangers who say, this influenced me to take a trip somewhere, this influenced me to take flying lessons, that is amazing. And I'm one of those people who, if I make a difference in one person's life, I'm happy with that. And I've actually made a difference in many people's lives. And so that it's exponential, that it made it worth it for me. So if your heart is set on doing it, and believe me, your heart and everything else has to be set on doing it, do it. Just don't really have any expectations from it.
That is fair advice, and I am absolutely with you on that. I have zero expectations that this will ever make me money, but just this effort. I'm not even published yet, and look what it's brought me. A friendship with you, connections with a lot of really amazing other writers and other women in aviation. And so it's been worth it if it's just for that. So, and my writing community from grad school and stuff. So, Erin, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you wanted to share about writing or publishing that we didn't talk about?
I think we've covered everything, but just thank you so much for having me. I think this group is wonderful. I have not been able to participate in past ones because of taking care of a sick parent, but I definitely plan to participate in future ones. And that's the thing, you know, if you love books, join a book club. They're always fun. They drink a lot. I'm not a big drinker, but they're still fun. And, you know, just get out there and enjoy the world and these friends that we can make with this mutual interest. I love it. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Erin.